the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped in a cloth. John 11:44. Dear Lord, thank you for calling us out of the grave. We're covered in our own flesh and sin and despair, and we try to hide from you. But you call us out to show us who you are, to wash away all of that sin, to set us free, to live in you. Thank you for the gift of your Son on the cross. Amen. Do you think it caught Jesus off guard when Martha said to him, there on the road, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died? I think it probably hurt a lot. Because of all people, Martha was the one to come out to him on the road. So strange, because you remember in Luke chapter 10, Jesus was the one that was teaching Martha how important it is to go and be there with people. They need to take a moment to pause and listen and be still and stop being so distracted by everything going on in the world all around you. Martha should just sit with her sister at the feet of her Lord and spend this time together. She was the one who had been cooking and cleaning and doing the dishes and couldn't stop. And now when she finally gets it, that she knows we should spend this time together, she asks her Lord, where were you? I was here. Mary was here. We want to spend this time together, but you weren't here. She knew that he rose Jairus' daughter from the dead, and that he is the Lord of the living. He is the light and the life of the world. He is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and with him all things were possible. If he were here, Lazarus wouldn't have had to die, but he was gone. So it's too late for her brother. Lazarus' life had been snuffed out, and her sister Mary, they had waited together for Jesus to come and heal Lazarus when he heard he got sick, or maybe even wait a little longer after he died, because they knew he could bring him back, he can raise him from the dead. But then as the body started to rot and decompose and stink, they had to move it into the tomb. It had been sitting there for 4 days already. So Martha has to say, Lord, if you were here, we wouldn't have had to go through this. And Jesus starts telling her about the resurrection of the dead. And it starts to make a little bit of sense to her. She's very analytical, and so she's given this hope. It's reasonable. Okay, one day, on the last day, resurrection day, we'll see Lazarus again. It makes sense. Don't have to worry today. And then Martha goes and tells Mary that their friend Jesus, he finally arrived. He got the news that Lazarus was sick, and then he came, and it's too late, but he's here. Mary jumps up. She rushes out the door, past her sister. Jesus still hadn't even made it to town yet. He's there on the road in the dirt, and he's walking on the road as she comes to him, weeping and crying and sobbing. She falls to the ground in the dirt right in front of him at his feet, and she insists with tears in her eyes. She says the same thing. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's a somber declaration of faith. Just as Martha knows Jesus is Lord, and there's evidence, and there's merit, and there's reason behind all these things, Mary believes in God with all of her heart. But God wasn't there when she needed him. Jesus sees this. He sees her pain and her sorrow and her willingness to trust and believe in him, even though she had lost the person closest to her. And then Jesus remembers he just lost someone he loves too. Jesus wept. He's troubled in spirit, and he falls into agony, and he grieves, and he's disheartened. Because man is not meant to die. We were never meant to die. If only he was there, maybe Lazarus wouldn't have had to die. So where was he? We have to go back a few verses to chapter 10, verse 22, at least. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he was sitting there at the Jordan River, the same place he had been baptized. He was probably reflecting over what had just happened. You might not realize this, but in chapter 10, verse 22, it mentions the Feast of Dedication. It's what we call today Hanukkah. It was one of the newer celebrations, less than 200 years old. There was a big party in Jerusalem every winter. Jesus was celebrating Hanukkah at the beginning of this picture. As you know, John marks the times and the seasons by the church holidays, that Jesus fulfills all of these things, and now it's the fulfillment of Hanukkah. It's to remind God's people of who's in charge. It's a feast day called the Feast of Dedication because they're meant to be rededicated to their Lord. They gather around in the middle of winter to remember that at one point the king of Syria had come and taken over Jerusalem and forced them to get rid of all of their customs and their culture and all their traditions, their religion, that they could not be dedicated to God anymore under their reign. Then this pagan king commanded them to idol worship and imposed Greek myths upon his people, and he turned horrible things upon the temple and the Jewish customs. They couldn't practice their own basic rites anymore. Then leaders rise up. The Maccabees stand against the Syrian king, and they retake Jerusalem for the Lord. And they rededicate the temple to God. They wash away any stain or blemish or any horrible thing that the pagans had left behind there in the temple, knowing that God was the one who had saved them. They lit the lights and the candles in the temple, and they realized they didn't have enough oil to light them more than one day. But then night after night, for 8 nights, until they had enough time to make the new sacred oil, God provided the oil that they needed. It was miraculous. It didn't make any sense that they'd been under this persecution, and then there's a revolt, that now God's in control again, God's leading the way, and now they have candles in the temple, but God is providing even the candles in the temple because they could not do it on their own. Even when God seemed so far away, he was in control. This whole time he was showing his people that what really mattered was that they were dedicated to him. Through the Syrian captivity, through the revolution, through not having enough oil in their candles, God was going to be there for them. And in this celebration, before Lazarus dies, as they think about their dedication to God, Jesus says, no one is able to snatch God's people out of his hands. That Jesus and the Father are one. And Jesus isn't going to allow sin or death or any false prophets to take God's people under siege again. Their hearts belong to their Lord. And the people in Jerusalem aren't very happy about what he has to say. They think Jesus is a false prophet, and they try to kill him. And so he has to run for his life, going far away out of the city to the Jordan River where he was baptized, where he thought about his dedication to God. Where he was when the sky opened up and the Lord said, "This is my Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." It is there at this river where Jesus was baptized that he first hears that Lazarus is sick. He's thinking about his baptism, how this is a new feast of dedication in the water and the word. You are made new and dedicated to God. You are made free by the gift of God. You are given new life in God. Sin, death, and the devil, they have no siege over you anymore. It might not always make sense. You might not always feel it. Even on a cold winter night, you now know that God is that light, that candle in your life that continues on in the darkness, brighter than any menorah. That's where Jesus was. And then he hears that his friend is sick, back in the town that tried to kill him. And he goes. Thomas says not to, but he goes. He has to see his friend. As Martha is there and meets him on the road, he says, "Show me the tomb, open it up." And Martha shouts out in the King James Version, "Lord, he stinketh." She doesn't want God to see this decomposition in front of him. But Jesus, in the book of John, he had to go to Samaria to see the woman at the well. He had to heal the man born blind, to show the power of God. He had to show Nicodemus something he couldn't see, to see God in the flesh and the love of God on the cross, the light shattering the darkness. Here in chapter 11 of the Gospel of John, Jesus had to wait for Lazarus to stinketh. Because the people could have said about Jairus' daughter that she was sleeping and she didn't really rise from the dead. Or if he would have came earlier, they could have said Lazarus was just fainted or he recovered on his own from his sickness. If it was just a day or two, that's plausible. But to show God's power over death, Lazarus had to already enter decay. It had already been 4 nights, maybe more if Mary and Martha were trying to wait for Jesus to come to raise him from the dead. And at the moment when they had almost lost all hope that Jesus would come and save their brother and friend, the beloved disciple Lazarus, Jesus does not let Mary's candle burn out. Just as God had saved his people from Syrian persecution, now the Son of God would save his friend from death itself. He shouts out, "Lazarus, come out," and it's a good thing he says his name because otherwise all the tombs would be empty. That's what he does. He proves that he is from God. He raises a man from the dead, and there's other documentation of this. Even in the Quran it says he does this, that he is a prophet of God. But what if Jesus himself were to die? And he was able to raise himself from the dead 3 days later. Then he wouldn't just be a prophet or a man. He would be God himself. That's exactly what he does, so that you may have life in his name. God, fill us with your Spirit in our baptism, that we may have the confidence to believe and grow in faith towards you and love towards each other, to live a life that honors you and serves you in this world. Amen. So I won't let you off the hook either. Will you be there for Ava and her family and support her in her Christian faith? If so, yes, with the help of God. Yes. Thanks be to God. Let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.